Now. Okay.
Oh, I wasn't recording either, so I'm just recording you now. All right.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. My name is Josh, and I do thank you for coming off to my panel today. I hope you're all having a wonderful time with EPIc DEMIcon, which I'm going to just be honest, I love the name. I've seen a lot of conventions try to be creative and quirky and quippy for the last, I don't know, what, lifetime. And this is the one that wins. I will say that straight up. All right. So while we wait for people to come in the chat, I just want to mention a couple things about myself. First of all, I am not a professor. I'm a professional at this, but I am not somebody who is like a multi-time award-winning author. I hope to be one day, but I'm not. What I am is someone who has spent literally years developing fantasy worlds, fantasy situations, character development, and everything else that goes into being an independent author, and not just an independent author, but also a gamer. Um, while I never really got into tabletop games because my mom and grandma were like, D&D? No. Like, all right, mom. Um, Thankfully, she never really looked into what Shadowrun was about, so I got a chance to play that a lot as a kid and a lot of Magic the Gathering. But I used to do a lot of computer games, and with computer games, even though things like EverQuest and Ion weren't exactly big on character development, if you were like me and joined role playing guilds and role playing groups, you got used to building something out of an existing framework. And that's where I'm going to go with today. This is not to be misconstrued as a masterclass. Again, I wish I could say it was. I do have multiple books published under my name. Four, five, six, seven, about nine, I think 10, either novels or novellas. I can't count. I can't keep track. The fact that I can't count is why I write, and not an accountant.
Hey,
Um,
hey, Josh.
yo,
I just wanted to give you a heads up. We do have a chat. I forgot to tell you about it, so I'm going to be watching for comments in the chat channel here. It's just above the panel channel itself, and we've got a widget here on Facebook. I won't interrupt you again, but if we have any questions, I'll ask those at the end.
oh hey, no problem at
Because I
all.
don't think you can
Please,
see them.
yeah,
I'm
absolutely. If
just
anybody's got a question, feel free to ask.
I just thought I'd point that out because I don't know that everyone is aware of it. All right, so I'm stepping out,
Okay.
and
Well,
I'll talk to you at the end.
I've got like five different subjects through here. Um, I'm going to be honest. The reason why I'm looking at my phone so much is because all of my notes are on this. I thought I could look at it on my laptop at the same time I talked, and turned out that was a lie. So, if you happen to notice me checking my phone every 5 seconds, it's because even though it's really shiny, I'm actually looking so I can tell you what I'm going to talk about. This is a six-part thing. I'll try to get through it as quick as I can. My notes actually run around like 30 some odd pages. One day I'll do a full compile and I'll publish it or something itself. But in the meantime, the first part about this is going to be world building, second part, character creation. If I have time, I would like to get into a little bit of anxiety, fear, and laying the groundwork for terrible things because it's not enough to have a world. It's having a world that breaks in a way that makes sense and is sort of rational. If there's time at the end, I do want to work on a little bit for religion. One of the hardest questions, bar none, I have ever been asked at a con or an event was at Mountain State Pop Expo, I think in 2019. Someone asked me, how do I determine what a sin is in the books? And I'm like, wow, that's like a really easy question to answer until I sat down to give an answer. And a year later, I was still fighting with that answer. So I worked up something, and I hope we can get to it. At the very end, I do have a bunch of links that I'll post in the chat and share with you guys. Some YouTube channels, some website resources, a few other things that I use on a regular basis that might help someone out there. So let me go ahead and get started with part one. Um, This isn't a full-blown how to create your world using the rules set aside in D&D or Pathfinder or whatever. This is a general concept building. I'm not going to tell you, how many hit points to give a mountain or whatever you're doing, but I am going to try to explain why you need to consider the locations of mountains, stuff like that. Um, my definition of world building is that it is the art of creating a natural environment where your character interactions can create and make the most sense, and an environment that is static enough so that your characters can make informed decisions based off of what they already know, should know, or will soon find out. Um, like, if you consider where I'm from, the city of Vienna, as Vienna, West Virginia, as a character or as a world in and of itself. If I've lived here my whole life, I should know where the Walmart is. If I've lived here my whole life, I should know where three different pharmacies are. Your characters, if they've lived in the Kingdom of Camelot, should know roughly where Arthur's castle is, or have an understanding of where the location of the Lake of the Lady is, or whatever. They should know some of these things default. If you're doing a tabletop game, you may have to give your characters some of this back information, give your players some information to start off with so they know what they're getting into, but it's kind of a groundwork. The world itself is a character. And I don't mean that in terms of, an NPC or something like that. Your world, if it's well crafted, is going to change as events are unfolding. Your world should be, to some level, interactive. If there is a dam that bursts and floods a village 3 hours away or 3 days away or whatever from the area where your characters are having their adventure in, there are decent odds you're going to have refugees showing up, or people who are injured, or people who are suddenly homeless, or things of that nature. It may not have a big impact on what your characters are doing, but it provides more of a fluid backdrop as to what's going on at any given time. Um, the first real thing to hit on this is the concerns of scale. Not every story is going to involve 3 continents and a moon. Some don't go past the end of your block. But even still, chair that I'm sitting in right now, it came from somewhere. This thing did not magically appear in my bedroom and did not have all of the parts and everything assembled. And even the parts that were pre-assembled, like the armrest, that steel did not come out of my kitchen. These things matter. It matters because you have to sort of plug in where everything is and the difficulty it took to get there. Take a fantasy setting. You have a giant castle on a hill. Where did the stone come from? Is there a nearby quarry? Did they have to rely on cheerful slave labor? What did they have to do to get that stone there? Are you going to go down the river and find a giant hole in the ground? Are you going to be in awe because this type of stone doesn't exist on this side of the planet? It had to come all the way from over there. Does that allow the person who owns the castle to flex a little bit for how rich they are? Very simple things matter when it comes to putting together a planet. Um, I always say that you are the god of your own world, but if you want to have a world that is believable and grounded in some level of realism, you need to have at least an understanding of where things came from. Which comes to the second part of this of, where did the stuff come from? Um, Humans are lazy. We like to have immediate access to whatever materials we need to do anything with. We never really put ourselves into situations where we're going to set up a village or a town or a store out in the middle of nowhere, far away from any resources, any water, any grazing land, any fertile soil, any woods, or anything that we need to build in a particular area. There are civilizations that have done wonders with limited resources, be it fantasy or be it real world style stuff. But until a civilization hits a point where you've got things like a Silk Road or where you have international travel, it gets really hard to expand. And this was especially true during the typical fantasy style era, which I define as anywhere from late ancient Roman Empire to early medieval, towards even the first part of colonial. You'll find a lot of popular fantasy like Lords of the Ring. They take weapons and armor and ship cannons and things of that nature from a variety of different time periods and mash them all together and say, here you go. You know, your pirates are blasting holes into giant ships where, you know, they're being manned by people who are using Bronze Age shields and stuff like that. It didn't really often happen that way, if ever. Um, so keeping that in mind, where okay, we have this village here. What are the natural resources around it? What industries are going to spring up next to it? What items are going to be available for your characters to use and the world to look like? If you're next to a marble quarry, you can expect to see more statues. Marble quarries bring sculptors, sculptors bring artwork, and whether or not they stay there or they get shipped there, and if they are shipping statues, how are they shipping them? Is there a port there? Is there a river? Everything connects and interacts in one way or another. Water transport is going to make trade a heck of a lot easier than just ground transport. If you have a dense forest nearby, you're going to have a hard time getting things in and out of it. Um, it's details like this that sort of make or break it. Take, for example, the chair. This is an example I use every single time the subject comes up. My chair. I love my chair. My chair is comfortable. I paid more for it than I should have, but I like it. Um, it has steel in it. It has plastic. It has grease. It has leather and padding and all this other crap that's probably bad for my health. This steel had to be mined. No, the iron had to be mined and turned to steel, etc. Then it had to be poured and cast and then packaged. The leather had to be either skinned from something, which I hope not. I don't think I paid that much for it, or it had to be chemically created. Um, then it had to be boxed up and it had to be delivered to a plant, and that plant had to box everything else up. Somebody had to print the instructions. Then they had to send it to me, and they sent it to me on a truck that was constructed with materials from an entirely other different area, put on a road that was made from asphalt that was mined on another part of the continent. And you start to see how all of these interacting things sort of mesh together, and these things will matter to your characters. If there are no iron or steel deposits or bronze or copper deposits in your area, your character is going to have a harder time finding a sword than if he's in a city. And this may seem like a very simple thing. You know, if there's no water, you have nothing to drink. But if there's no water, there's also no to limited crops. There's also no to limited livestock, which leads to food scarcity, leads to clothing scarcity, leads to, you know, trade scarcity. When you really break down what's where, and that's even ignoring the other things that come with water. Is it fresh water? Is it salt water? Is it potable? You know, is it toxic? Is it, you know, this may feel like a much deeper dive than you think you may need to do. And if that's the case, then by all means, just say, hey, there's a village by a river. Like, not everything needs to be 1,000 points of detail. It's not like a Tolkien story where you have to give a backstory to every tree branch. But it helps to know for interactive points, for whether it's your main plot or possibly a side plot that your characters might even get into, um, where some of the stuff is coming from. And back to the lake, to the village on a river example, um, why is there a village there? Again, people are lazy. We don't like to go places we don't have to go unless we are running from something, and that's a reason for a village to be there. There's plenty of examples of societies that have been founded by people leaving another society or another area. Um, but if there is a village on a river, what's the geographical history like? Does it have a history of flooding? Is it a area where there are plenty of fish? Is fishing a big deal right there? Does this river go towards a uninhabited area of the land, or is it part of a major trade thoroughfare? You have all kinds of adventures that can start up by saying, and something showed up on a boat today. Cool. Where did it come from? And you can say, well, it came from the kingdom of Amalur, where they've got nothing but gold lions and tigers, and oh my. Okay, cool. So if they have access to these materials, then this is going to be what? A shipment of gold ore or minted gold coins? Or is it coming here because we have some sort of um, I don't know, do we have a gold press or a milling press here? Is this stuff coming here because we're part of a major trade hub, or are they stopping here because we are the first village downriver in 6 days, kind of thing? These these sort of things matter, and when it comes to putting together something for a realism stake, you don't have very many rivers that run through the Sahara Desert. You don't have snow-covered mountains right in the middle of a swamp most of the time. There are some geographical anomalies here and there, but the setting for your story, whether it's a tabletop game or a novel or whatever, can be incredibly impacted by, how rough is the terrain, how easy is travel, how abundant are the food supplies, what type of food supplies are there. And again, it's something that I have noticed gets glossed over a lot in a lot of fantasy games and fantasy stories that I've read in the past. And I'm not saying that you need to sit down with a pen and a paper and a map and sketch everything out down to the last quarter mile. But I am suggesting that if you build up an understanding of what's around, even if you're only building up 3 city blocks, you have a greater understanding for where everything is. For example, I have a pharmacy that is about 4 blocks down from my house. A few years ago, they had a break in. This break in, not a whole lot was stolen, just the average, druggies breaking into a pharmacy kind of thing. But it increased the local police patrols. We had increased news coverage in this small area. We had more people who were suddenly locking up at night and giving their neighbors wary glances. It was stuff like that. It was something that happened near the point of my personal story of my life. It didn't directly affect me, but if that pharmacy was another 10 blocks away, it wouldn't have mattered anything for my individual neighborhood. Nobody would have cared because we roll that way here. And the same thing holds true in your stories. If there is a kingdom that's suddenly going through a drought, this particular out of the way village may see a greater influx of people coming over, or trade arrangements trying to find a way to transport potable water or anything else like that. Um, Seasons and climate, I'm really going to just burn through this. But again, it's harder to travel in the winter than it is in the summer, and if it's the apex of summer and a desert, it's going to be even harder to travel then. Um, but you do need to keep a watch for the way that weather itself interacts with your environment. And by that, I mean the Statue of Liberty wasn't always green. It turned green over time due to the salt water and the humidity, which tarnished original copper color and turned it green as Kermit, which may not have too much of an interaction with your character's copper shield, or if that shield's been laying out there for 6 months, it might. It might be tarnishing, it might be rusting around the edges. I built a movie prop, well, replica movie prop several years ago, and I bought what I thought was aluminum for the backing for it. Turned it out to be a solid steel. Not a problem. I mean, it's heavier than I wanted it to be by far, but where I ran into a huge issue, and I didn't realize that I had bought steel instead of aluminum until it started to rust just sitting in my garage. I live in a very humid area, and I was like, um, "Wait a minute, this was not supposed to happen this way." And it's entirely likely you will have situations where similar things happen. Your character just bought a brand new silk robe and took it to some place in the woods, and in 3 weeks it's been destroyed by moths. Look, this stuff really does happen, and it adds that extra level of irritation and I don't want to say gritty realism, but it adds that extra little last touch of, huh, this doesn't feel like it's high fantasy where everything is good, nothing bad happens. This feels like something that I would have to deal with when I woke up on a bad Monday. Um, let's see. Moons. The number of moons is something that I see used a lot. A classic example for me is EverQuest and EverQuest 2. For the first 5 years of the game, you think it's got one moon. Then suddenly a second moon appears out of nowhere. Nothing happened in terms of the geographical landscape or whatever. There were no earthquakes. There were no massive tide changes. Even when the moon eventually got destroyed, again, there were no geographical changes of any real note that happened uh, during the destruction event. And you see that no matter what. I see Keller's here in the chat. He's probably going to growl at me for this one, but when the second Death Star exploded over Endor, what happened to the Ewoks? Did they all die in apocalyptic fire? Where did this go foul? Because something would have to go foul when you start introducing major physical objects that have a direct physical reaction on the world outside of whatever magical system you've created. Let's see. I'm scrolling down, scrolling down. Okay. Another big thing is, what is day to day life like? My day to day life is not very exciting. I get up in the morning, feed the cat, I get caffeine, I check a look at the news, then I get to work and I work, or try to work most of the day. Then I go fix lunch or dinner. I go grocery shopping if I have to. My life is very bland and not atypical compared to a lot of other people. Thing is, though, my life as a guy who lives by himself, with a sick cat, with a mom in a nursing home, self employed, is different than the life of somebody who has a kid, has a wife, has a job at the local DuPont, or whatever. And our lives are vastly different than the life of a friend of mine who lives in Canada and how she goes about her day to day. Yeah, there are similarities. She gets up, she looks at the news, she drinks caffeine, goes about her day. But the interactions we have on a cultural level, what days we work, she's got holidays I don't have, I've got holidays she doesn't have. Uh, then when you compare, okay, how's American life like versus how is life like in Germany or Europe or Russia, and the allowances that they have to make because of the climate, because of the job market, the social economic situations, their day-to-day life is different than my day-to-day life by it's similar because we're human, but it's vastly and widely different. And you're going to experience that same exact concept if you're writing a story that is wider than your local city. Um, as such, some very basic rules and situations you need to keep in mind when you are developing your world. If it's on a kind of a macro level, um, let's see, just some general ideas here. How important are the local religions to your society? What kind of religions are there? And we'll get to that question here in a little bit. But does it impact the day-to-day work or work time available for your average citizen? In the US, we have a very religious population, or a large portion of the population that claims to be religious. We'll put it that way. But it doesn't interact or interfere with our day to day. We take Sundays off if we can. A lot of people go to church on Sundays. We wear religious insignia. We get federal holidays on numerous religious, holidays. Banks are closed, things of that nature. But if you compare how our society in the U.S. interacts with, say, or compares to, contrasts to, society in Syria or Saudi Arabia, where they have specific rules according to their religion of when they have to pause their workday, go pray, come back, and continue. These things can create a very big difference when it comes to what the day to day religious impact is on your world's way of life. And if your world is interacting in that way, chances are your characters, if they are part of that religious group, are going to follow societal norms, or if they are not part of that religious group, they're going to have a level of conflict there because their beliefs are not congruent with the beliefs of the other society or the area that they're in, which can result in some, everything from general disquiet to actual fighting, or character development where they grow as they come to terms with or find a way to accept what's going on around them. Um, and again, that's it's a concept that gets brought up a lot in fantasy, where it's like, oh well, this character completely doesn't fit in with this society. Watch them bumble around, which is okay, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times, you don't get some of the same stakes that we feel in the real world. Um, Insulting someone's religion in the wrong part of the U.S. Let's just even go with that. If you insult somebody's religion in southern West Virginia, I, I've been to southern West Virginia. I know it's not going to go well for you. If you do the same thing in southern Sudan, probably not going to go well for you either, even if it's accidental. There are countless news stories of people who go over and like spit gum on a sidewalk in Sydney, Australia. I don't know if I'm older than the rest of you guys or not, or if you remember, when that was a big news story back in the 1990s, I think. Um, or somebody did that and got into a crap load of trouble that they would have never gotten into if they were in New York City. It's not a religious thing, but it's a social thing. And what you can get away with socially, legally, or culturally varies so differently that at times it quits being oh no, he tipped the server and the server thought it was a bribe, or oh no, he didn't tip the server and the next time he came back, that guy refused to serve him again. Or it could be, oh no, he said this and ended up on getting punched out or thrown in jail or arrested for sedition or heresy or something like this. Um, your characters should be mindful of that, because you would be mindful of that, I would hope, if you went to an entirely different culture and you weren't, a jerk. There's nothing wrong with a jerk character. Uh, but how they are going to be perceived by the people they interact with will be an entirely different beast. And I'm way behind on this. Um, Let me skip some of those. Recreation. Humans, since the dawn of ever, have liked to play games. Playing games is a part of human development, and it is still a part of adulthood. Not that anybody would know anything about playing games or the importance of them in an online gaming convention or anything like that. Heyo. But uh, one of the very few fantasy worlds I can ever remember having a big focus on games was Final Fantasy X, I think. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but the one where you spend a lot of the time going from city to city playing underwater basketball or whatever it was called. Um, how people spend their time, whether it's drinking or playing music or playing cards or dice or throwing some equivalent of a ball or chucking rocks or whatever. Games have such a tremendous influence on our culture. You can't go to the local mall without seeing things where people are selling sports memorabilia or hearing, talk on ESPN or whatever else, and people become very tribal based off of how they feel about certain games or teams or things of that nature. And you don't want to miss that as part of the culture. A culture that doesn't play, it's got something very, very unusual, very odd to it. You don't have to go in depth with it. You don't have to, really push on it. But at the same time, if you are going to include games and you are basing it off of a realistic or a touch of realism to it, make sure that the games you're playing in this culture in your time period actually make sense. Excuse me. By this, I mean everybody from the ancient Romans and beyond played dice in some form or another. Dice games were incredibly common. Card games were not very common until typeset print came around for several hundred years after the ancient Roman Empire. You sit back and you see things like Pirates of the Caribbean, they're playing dice, or you go slightly ahead of that and you start seeing them play cards. How did they make the cards? Where did they get their dice from? It's a very important distinction to make. And it goes back to what you can create in a given social or societal setting based off of available industry. If there is no printing industry, there are probably no cards to play. That kind of thing. Um, then as we get down through here, okay, tying back into religion real fast, you also have the question of holidays and weddings. Weddings, as they're performed now, really didn't even kick in for the common folk for not much past the last 150, 200 years. Before then, they were a celebration, they were simple, but a huge, massive 300, 400 person showing up, ultra extravagant wedding with white dresses and the whole nine yards wasn't really a big thing unless you were very, very noble, very, very rich, and were trying very, very hard to show off. The average peasant didn't do a whole lot of that. Not that they weren't important events to a farm community or whatever, they were, but how they were developed and how those types of celebrations happened was incredibly different based off of your position in the world. And again, if you're tying a sense of realism or a sense of history into your work to give your audience a way to ground themselves into the world, things like that you should take note of. Same thing with holidays. Let's one of my favorites that never gets talked about: World Nutella Day on February the 5th. Almost nobody knows this is a thing. But if you are a huge Nutella fan like I am, uh, it's a big deal. You like it. You go buy Nutella. You go eat Nutella on World Nutella Day. You all know Christmas, but do you know World Emoji Day on July 17th or World Bacon Day on December 30th? Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. How much your characters and your world celebrate any given holiday or what reasons you think of for a holiday and how those holidays are celebrated are entirely up to you, but they add a whole lot of extra flavor. Now, does it matter if, you have a Christmas type celebration, but your story takes place 6 months after it? Well, unless there's a direct tie back to that, probably not. But is it something to keep in mind if you're writing a series that takes place over 10 months, 12 months, or whatever? Might well be. Um, my current novel takes place over a course, current series takes place over the course of 3 months. Is a celebration going on, but it's not a holiday style situation. However, my next novel in the same series that I'm planning on releasing will have a holiday coming up. Why? Does that holiday affect what I'm doing right now? No, but I have set it in the timeline so that if there's a chance that I can introduce a line saying, well, I can't wait for next whatever, then I will, because that helps your characters grow. It helps your audience pay more attention to the world, helps your audience feel more immersed in the world. The absolute same thing goes to say for music and art. Music and art is so critical to the development of a society because it shows what they appreciate, it shows what they're going through, it shows their development on an intellectual and technological level. And it is the way that most societies express themselves. When you pick up any kind of history book, no matter the book, and you look at it, one of the very first things that's going to be talked about, or at the very least, one of the very big subheadings, is going to be art. Now, I can't draw to save my life. I can't sing. I certainly can't write songs. And I'm not saying that you should have to. But I'm saying is if you are doing a fantasy series that is based around a culture that has similarities to, say, the ancient Romans or the ancient Greeks, you're going to see typically statues where you have people who are not wearing clothing. You're going to see body art and graffiti, which the ancient Romans were really disturbingly good at. Um, Things of that nature are going to be expressed in the world, and they're going to be able to be used as a backdrop for your characters to even talk about or see as they're walking down a street, or a way for your players to interact with the world. We all know that, let's give a coin to your Witcher, but it's always sung by the bard. The bard is out there and talking up the Witcher or whatever else, and that's great. That's a way for your art to interact with your characters or interact with your audience. One last thing of general world building that I do want to talk on are monsters. And this is something that I see a lot of people, whether it's tabletop gaming or PC gaming or wherever else, they all fall into the same kind of mindset where we all know wolves and sharks exist. We all know, have a general understanding of what is a giant, what is a centaur. Um, we have a rough idea that most vampires are allergic to the sun or have problems with garlic. The thing is, though, what we do is we draw on those and we use them as inspiration, but we forget, and we're quite good at forgetting, that we are not constrained to those requirements. We are not constrained to the shambling zombie of The Walking Dead. 28 Days Later did the running zombies. World War Z took a great zombie movie and changed everything about it, and you ended up with zombies that were more mountain and molehill type creatures than they were, Walking Dead style variants. It is completely acceptable to break the tropes in any way you want to break them, as long as you understand and you talk about, hey, this is going to be a story about zombies. People are going to expect shambling, rotting, undead creatures. They're not going to go in and expect to be hit with an army of angry flying fairies that call themselves zombies tribe. That's You have to make sure you're meeting your expectations, but don't be afraid to add your own spin to it. Some of the greatest vampire stories in my mind are things like Vampires Los Muertos, or the vampires from Blade, or even the vampires from Buffy. Stories that were relatively anchored in reality, but you had an understanding of what it was you were going to get into, and still the creator had enough room to change them enough to fit the narrative. Um, but just because there's a world full of monsters you can draw from, whether it's a D&D manual or Pathfinder manual or EverQuest or Ion or Skyrim or whatever, don't forget don't be afraid to break out the Dr. Morial and make your own. Don't be scared to like not have a bear zombie or something like that, or an owlbear with tentacles. If you can find a way to explain it and have it make sense, go wild, go nuts, make your monsters however you want to do and have fun with it. I think there's a lot to be said for homebrewed encounters when it comes to tabletop gaming, and as I have long heard it explained, a novel is basically just a single player game of D&D. So if anybody's got any questions, go ahead and ask real quick while I judge time. Let's see, I've got 15 minutes left. I haven't even finished the first part. Wow. All right, I'm going to jump deep ahead into the character section. I will post all of these notes to my Facebook page, which I will post a link to in chat. So if you want to see all the stuff that I've typed in that I haven't talked about, or you have any feedback, feel free to let me know. Any questions out there by chance?
We've got somebody typing one right now.
Okay.
I'll read it to you when we get it. Oh, he was asking, will there be any access for those who don't have Facebook? This video will end up on our YouTube, and I'm sure it'll end up on Josh's or whatever he wants to put it on. Where are you going to be plugging this, Josh?
Well, I was going to put it on YouTube and Facebook. I'm not sure when I'll get it up on YouTube. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Facebook definitely today if
Oh, the
OBS
notes.
records.
He's referring to the notes.
To the notes. I will put the notes up in a downloadable PDF format on my website. Um, I'll
Put a
try
link
to
in your
get
YouTube
them
video.
up today, but I don't have a link that I can give you. Shoot me your email address, and I will
What
email
what
it to
is
you.
what is your website?
It's sagadmw.com.
All right, you got that, Apollyon? SagaDMW.com is where they will eventually be. I think that's good enough.
Right. Where they eventually will be, I'm not sure. I'll have to make a menu icon or a download for them. Um, if you can shoot me an email at sagadmw@gmail.com, I will send you the notes this afternoon.
Okay. If he didn't catch that, I will send him that email. I'm sure he caught it.
Okay.
So,
Anybody
yeah,
else?
you doesn't look like anybody else is typing right now. However, if you want to keep going for a few more minutes, or maybe you and I can just have a discussion, what do you feel like doing?
Well, like I said, I've still got plenty of to go through. But if you and I just want to go ahead and chat, what have you been thinking so far about this?
Oh, I think it's great, useful. I've been kind of more curious about yourself. I personally have been reading a lot lately, and this has been helpful in providing insight into things that I've been listening to, more specifically in reading. I've been listening to like the entire Brian Sanderson, bibliography on Audible lately, and a lot of I can see a lot of what you're describing at play there. So first
Sanderson
off,
has a really good YouTube channel that he does a lot of full scale masterclass level webinars.
oh
So
really?
I
I,
think
I said
it's
Brian. It's Brandon.
I
I've
think it's
listened to so
Sanderson.
many
Let me
books.
let
I
me
can't
double
believe I
check on
messed that
that.
up.
I think it's Sanderson. Um,
I know he's got an active website where he responds to fans very actively. Yeah, I just finished his latest Stormlight book. I thought it was great. But let's talk about you. How long have you been writing? I know you might have mentioned that in the beginning that you've
Actually, I
published
don't
9
think
or
I
10
did.
novellas.
Okay, so about me a little bit. I have been writing, quote unquote, professionally, if you can call it that, for about about 5 years now. I've spent most of my life one way or hang on one second. Is that okay? I've spent most of my life writing for. Let me back that up. When I was a kid, I used to write really, really, really crappy Ghostbusters style stories in crayon. And then when I was growing up, I sort of fell out of it. But about the time I hit, I don't know, like right when I started in college, I had an idea where I was like, well, you know what, I want to write a novel. And so I started and I played around with it, and then a lot of life happened, and I didn't quite get as much done as I'd hoped. And by the time I finished it, it was, shoot, what, 2005, 2006. Online digital publishing wasn't really a thing by that point. It was just sort of starting for the independent market, because back when I first started writing in my 20s, man, I feel so bloody old. When I first started really writing in my 20s, everything was still the traditional publishing route where you had to get an agent, you had to print everything off, you had to get copyright on your own. All of it was really complicated, and if you didn't have a lot of seed money, you couldn't go anywhere with it. Then I kept writing as much as I could. Life intervened for a while. I didn't get back into writing a lot until about 5, 6 years ago. And I discovered how Amazon had set up their online independent publishing kind of thing where anybody who wanted to publish a book could, and they do. And I thought, well, okay, let's see how this works. I've been telling people for years I'm a writer. Let's see how if it's an easy platform to get involved on. And it turned out it really was. The first couple of things that I wrote and self-published, I'm proud of because I did them. I would go back and do them differently if I could. I started with a simple short story as a proof of concept kind of thing, and then I moved to a standalone novella set in the same world that I was really fleshing out. And years ago, I had written a 30-page short story that I called Snowflakes in Summer. And I thought it was a fun little thing to write. And I thought 4 years ago, why don't I take this 30-page short story and polish it up and publish it on Amazon, set it for 99 cents, and call it a day? And I tried. I tried. But as I started breaking it down and like, well, this is, I mean, it's a short story. I've never met an and I don't like. So I can keep talking about anything for hours on end, usually is not a big deal for me. Um, and I kept finding ways to add and to change and to modify and more backstory to add and more world to develop. And I went from a 30-page short story to a year later, I had a 270-page book and the plot wasn't done. So I went from having one book to two books. And then I finished the second book and was like, okay, I'm good. As soon as I dropped it into formatting, it was like, oh, this is 2.5 books in this book. And oh, crap. So two books became three books. And then three books became three books and a side published, there's a word for this, companion novella where it continued the plot following secondary characters. He often did some stuff while the main stuff was going on. And then by the time this was finished, it was like, oh, well, I've been writing for 2.5 years now, and or 3 years now, publishing, every 6 months. And that's pretty much where that went with that. So it started off as a, well, I'll just do the small little short story and go from there. And then it blossomed and I've learned a lot about the independent publishing industry. I could easily give a class on a list of things of what not to do and how not to set up. Um, Thankfully, I've had a lot of really great friends and a really good support system who have helped me figure out things and pointed me in the right direction for various resources and things of that nature. And it's the main reason I like to do panels like this, because when I started writing, I didn't give any consideration to money. I didn't give any consideration to, um, why is this village here? Why is it important? Why do I need to be concerned about what's around it? That stuff, it sort of flows naturally, but every time had to go back to rewrite something to make it make sense, I was like, well, I would have saved a lot of time if I'd laid out these rules to start with. And when I really dove headfirst into, what makes a world building exercise, what makes a world. And while I'm not an award winning author or anything like that, that is one thing that I continually get pulled aside and said, hey, the world building and this is really solid. We appreciate all the effort you put into it, which is a nice feeling. And so I like to share that with other people because even if you're not writing out a full novel, if you are doing a tabletop game or you're just doing some fanfic or something like that, if you're doing it for an audience of anybody other than you, because you can justify, why they're calling gold gold in your head. If you're just, writing a story for yourself to see, you don't need to go into 1,000 pages of detail because you know it's there. But if you're showing somebody the work, if you are trying to get them to interact with what you're doing, if you can reach out to them with established rules, you'll have a lot easier time keeping their interest, is what I found.
Well, you know, I've got a lot of things that I could continue to talk about if I let myself, but we've got the next stream coming up. So
Okay.
I guess the one thing that I caught out of that interested me is you started throwing yourself in the deep end a bit later in life than I might have expected, and I think that's something that people could take away from this. I didn't start doing the thing that I consider like my great love until I was in my 30s. It sounds like you were late 20s at least when you did it. I think that's important to try something new, even if you're a little older.
Yeah, it is. One thing that constantly you see a lot in writing groups is, well, just because you didn't start writing when you're 20 doesn't mean you can't do it. I only published my novel when I was 50. You see a lot of stories like that. Um, for me, I'm writing right now. I originally hadn't planned on being a professional author. I hadn't planned on making this my life's work. But life is one of those things that sometimes it does things you aren't expecting. And sometimes you get opportunities and sometimes you lose opportunities. The things that I had planned to do, I didn't get to do. So now I'm doing this. And I don't know how well I'm doing at it, but I'm doing it and I'm pushing forward from there. Who knows if I'm going to be still doing this next year? 2020 taught us one thing, it's that we know nothing and we don't know what's going to happen next. So you just have to be
Well,
willing to roll with it.
I guess that brings me to my very last question. 2020 wasn't great for everybody. It wasn't great for Charcon. It wasn't great for board gaming, although it has transformed it in a way. I think a lot of people are playing online when they hadn't before. Um, how's it been for a writer? 2020. Did
Okay.
it give you the chance to button down the hatches and batten down the hatches and take care of it, or was it
It,
too stressful of an environment?
both. I'll explain it this way. Most of my sales prior to 2020 were at conventions. I didn't often do better than break even points, but I only had 4 books, 5 books at the time. I now have 7 or 8. So there's going to be a difference between my convention run in 2019 versus my convention run, hopefully in 2021 or 2022. But most of my efforts were involved around establishing myself as a presence at a convention, having, buying table supplies and building things and making little arts and crafts things to sell in addition to my books. And I made about 1,300 in convention sales in 2019 alone, just selling books across West Virginia, Ohio, and areas nearby. But when 2020 rolled through and everything suddenly shut down, I've had to move almost all of my focus, almost all of my investment, almost all of my time into learning how to market online to sell books in a digital marketplace rather than focus on paperback sales and use my paperback sales to drive my digital sales. I'm using my digital sales right now as the bulk of the income that comes in, and that's having to switch gears mentally. I think that it's a better long term plan now that I've been forced to switch to working towards the digital thing. But I have to be completely honest, if 2020 hadn't shut down the convention circuit, I probably wouldn't have sat down to watch as many advertising webinars or classes or bought subscriptions to ad services and things of that nature that I ended up doing rather than, just going from one convention to another and walking around with a newsletter sign up sheet. So for me, it was a big change of pace, but I'm better off for it in terms of where I'm at business wise. Like a lot of other people, not so much better, with everything else because it's been everything else.
Yeah, well, it sounds like flexibility is the key. So it's 3:59. We've got another stream up at 4.
All right,
I'm going to go ahead and hop off here, and I think we'll be good to go, man.
all right. Thanks a ton for having me, and good luck with the rest of the convention.
Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, happy to. All right, take care, guys. I will check in with you soon.
All right, thanks. Have a good one.
Bye. Okay, close it already. Oops.
A little something here.